here we are. I'm here with Richard Vobes in the famous studio. So,
hello.
Nice to
see you, Tim.
Yeah.
I hope you like the studio.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. We've already had a little bit of a tour and a talk about it. So I just want to ask you a few questions, really.
Be my guest. Ask away.
So I've got right at the top, who is the real Richard Vobes?
Well, who is the real Richard? Well, it's me, isn't it? Hello. What do you mean?
Let's go right back and start with your childhood, school. 'Cause I believe you went to school in
I
Horsham.
did go to school.
in Horsham,
In
though.
Horsham, yes. So I'm a product of the 1960s. My parents they moved around because of my dad's job. He was into telecommunications. He ended up running his own business, designing aerials, not TV aerials, but marine aerials, covert aerials for the police, funnily enough. He just got asked to make all sorts of aerials. And actually, although at the time, growing up, I used to ridicule him because it's, to me, when I was seeing him make these things, it just seemed to be bits of wire joined together. It's interesting now that some of the stuff he was telling me about wavelengths and things has been part of my journey of understanding things like electromagnetic frequencies and the dangers of things like 5G technology, because he was telling me about that, not in any conspiratorial way, he was just explaining how the frequencies worked and how in his area it was important that these longer waves and medium waves were relatively safe, and the smaller you got, the more radiation and the dangerous they were, because he was doing that well before the technology was around now. So it's interesting how things in your childhood come back later on. Anyway, so yes, I went to Forest Boys School in Horsham, in West Sussex, an all-boys school, comprehensive, 1970s, typical sort of thing. I was bullied a lot, didn't really fit in. I think because my dad and my mum were very independent, so I was independent as well. Had an excellent childhood, I think. My mum was an alcoholic and my dad was very busy with his business. So I was kind of left to roam around. We had a derelict farm at the back of the house because we were on the edge of town, and there was all this farmland to go and play in, which of course farming has become a fascination for me in all my life about growing things, even though I'm in, I suppose, a townhouse, in a 2-up 2-down townhouse in Worthing. But that the importance of farming, again, it's amazing how your childhood just seeps into you without realising it. And the farm that I had as my playground, in which we used to find clay pipes, showing you that this had been farmed for several hundred years, this particular area, is now housing estate.
Oh yes,
and boxy houses, themed up weirdly in a different history than what was actually there, which really annoys me.
Indeed, yes. So let's move on a little bit in your childhood days. Teenage years.
Yeah.
What were your interests during your teenage years, would you say?
I got very interested in my dad's old Grundig reel-to-reel tape recorder. I loved the fact that I could record my voice and I could play it back at different speeds. So I could speak very fast like that, or pitch shifted up, or I could speak very slow. So I used to do silly little plays using tape. And then I got into film, cine film, Super 8, Standard 8, Single 8, all of those early film stuff. And we used the farm and the derelict farm to make silly little films. And then I'd be in the evenings. So my sister was into pop music and your normal sort of stuff. I was in there splicing with acetone and joining bits of film together and projecting it and saving up pocket money and making films. And I'm still arguably doing the same. So filming and performing has been in my blood. I was also a member of an amateur an amateur youth drama group, Horsham Young Players, that met in these old barracks, which actually was, I realised years later, I just thought it was an army barracks, but actually it was the bomb disposal unit. It's now covered with a major supermarket whose name I nearly said, I don't want to say it, it's all flattened and all that history gone.
Again, a very
and poignant, because it's. I think when you go back to your childhood, and it's so important, and then you see it's just obliterated, as if you weren't there and the history of it wasn't there, and it's painful.
Yeah, that's happening not just with buildings, but mentally as well, because a lot of stuff I was taught at school, they teach it totally different now.
And revisionist. History is being rewritten left, right and centre, and the things that are important and the values that you have are being changed. And I think my generation, your generation, are the last in which there was some real ethos in there. Now it seems the ethos is very different and it's very temporary.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Actually, just as an interesting aside, I was thinking this on the way down here. The demographic of the freedom movement, from what I've seen, all the places I've gone to, and subscribers I've met, viewers I've met, etc., they all seem to be roughly between the 40 to 80 demographic, and particularly between the 50 to 70 demographic. And at the age of 59, I'm bang in the middle of that, and I believe you're pretty much the same.
Yeah, I'm
kind
60.
of age. And so we seem to be right in the epicentre. And have you any thoughts why that is?
Well, I do. To me, it's very clear, because our generation grew up in the analogue world. The younger generation, 40 down, and particularly my, say, 30s down, have grown up pretty much in the digital world and have embraced digital as if it's an everyday thing. For my dad, who was in his 80s, he'd be in his late 80s now, he was struggling with VHS and recording television. I would invariably have to go over to see him so I could program, so he could watch BBC One and record BBC Two, that old chestnut. But kids have grown up, and of course they've just embraced the rapidity of change and their mobile phones and these little screens. And it's my belief they've been programmed to do that very early on. But the older generation have seen real record players where you could put the needle onto the record and see the process. Typewriters where you could see the the mechanics of things. Whereas now with the modern technology, it's kind of magic to me how it works. You just use your finger. Yes, kids grasp very quickly the process of this button, this button, this button, but there's no concept of actually how things really work. And of course we've seen that with things like food. Food is highly processed, comes in, if you're buying meat, the younger generation have no knowledge really what animal that meat is from. They know a chicken breast is a chicken breast, or a chop is a chop, but they may not actually have ever seen a chicken, or a pig, or whatever it is, and they're not familiar with the fact that these animals were living and breathing, and my parents were around when electricity was coming to the villages, and or gas or water. And it's hard for people sometimes to even imagine there was a time, it's hard for people to imagine there was a time before the internet, let alone many of the things. And yet mankind has survived for thousands of years without electricity, gas, the internet, cars and all these things. And it's only been in the last 100 years we've had this. And in the last 20 to 30 years, it's accelerated so much that we've become so dependent on these things that I feel that's partly half the problem, because people have lost their independence and can't work out how to do things. So those older generations, I think they feel the change, and they see, let's say the conspiracy or the ever-tightening restrictions on how things are, much more than young people, because they have wisdom. They've been around longer.
Yeah, we've got a foot in each camp, haven't we?
Yeah.
As you just said, in the analogue and the digital camp. And things like imperial and metric, I don't know about you, but I can think in both terms of feet and inches and centimetres and metres.
Well, I do struggle when people say, oh, it's so many metres, because I think, well, what's that in feet and yards? Because as you say, it automatically I think like that.
Indeed, yes. Yeah. You mentioned cars a minute ago. What was your first car, just out of interest?
My first car was a Morris Traveller.
Oh, lovely.
It was a Morris Traveller, and we had one when I was a kid growing up, and when I passed my test, I drove around in my mum's car for a bit, which I think she had an NSU. Do you remember an NSU?
Yeah.
I can't even remember what kind of. I just remember it being a white NSU and thinking, I don't know what is that, Russian or East European?
Eastern European, I think. Is it Polish?
Yeah.
I want to say it's a Polish brand, but I could be wrong.
She also had an Austin Countryman.
Right.
Little thing. But the one I bought, the very first one, I think it was £30. £30 Morris Traveller was a green Morris Traveller, and I only had it 3 months because the near side front suspension collapsed. The kingpin came out. Oh. I veered across a dual carriageway and smashed into a tree and broke the bloody thing off. Top speed was like 43 miles an hour, so it was barely going, but I couldn't control it.
So you're a lucky man.
If it wasn't for the central reservation, I probably would have hit another car.
Yeah.
But
I had my first car. Well, it wasn't my first car, but had it in my young days. Funnily enough, was a mini estate. It was an bright orange mini estate.
Oh yeah.
And you could only put about a quarter of a tank of fuel in it. Because there's a hole in the tank and it would sort of leak if you put any more fuel in there.
My God, how dangerous is that?
Yeah, I was a bit reckless in my young days, I've got to admit, but you survive these things.
Well, hopefully.
And I wouldn't recommend that to anyone these days.
No, blimey.
But yeah, I'd sort of put fuel into the tank and then another bit of fuel in a jerry can thing, and then when I ran out, I'd sort of fill up from that. But it's some of the silly things I used to do. It wasn't great, but anyway.
But that's growing up, isn't it?
It is, yes.
and that freedom to do silly things.
Yeah. You haven't. Okay, that I wouldn't recommend that, like I say, but
no.
But yeah, we had the freedom to be a bit reckless, and whereas you just haven't got that freedom anymore, have you? No.
You do feel like everything now is being governed by legislation every which way to curtail any sense of independence.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on a little bit. Your career, skills, jobs and businesses that you've had and run. Well, we know quite a lot about your skills, obviously, all the video and camera stuff, but and things like juggling and performing, public speaking. So, how did all that start?
Well, I suppose it started when I was at school. Leaving school at 15, I didn't want to go into further education because it was a comprehensive. I do feel that they didn't want me to go into further education anyway, and I'd said to my careers teacher, who that week was a careers teacher. Previously he'd been a science teacher, but suddenly he had the knowledge of careers and stuff. And he asked me what I wanted to do, and I said to him, well, I'd like to be either a filmmaker, a director on movies, big blockbuster movies, or could I be an actor, please? They're the things I'm really interested in. And he said, and he had one of those, I don't know if you remember the old index boxes with the card indexes, and he went, oh, hold on a minute, and he went like this, and he said, there's a job in the Carfax as a printer. How about that? And what went through my mind was, I could earn some money, I could buy the cine camera I've been eyeing up, and rolls of film. So I just said, yeah, that would be great. So I became a printer for a small reprographics business, and that was really good, because there was only 3 other employees, or there was 4. There was 3 directors and the secretary lady, and then me, and it was on 3 floors in the Carfax in an old, I suppose, Victorian building, and you went up the stairs. And I learnt how to greet the customer, find out what the customer wanted. Often they would be builders and people like that going, I want 500 billets, please. He said, do you mean invoices? Yeah, whatever, yeah, billets. Or letterheads and things like that. So it's all stationery, pretty much. And in those days, and we were talking of the late 70s and very early 80s, you didn't have all this wonderful computers and things like that. So if it was like, I don't know, Fred Smith, Builders, you'd get out the Letraset. Do you remember Letraset?
Yes.
You'd get out the Letraset and you'd sit there and you'd create the artwork, doing letter by transferring these letters. And you had to get it right, otherwise it looked crooked. And you couldn't let you'd get Fred Smith and it would be on the last bloody letter that it would fail to go, and you'd try and fill it in with a black pen and keep it straight. Then you'd make the plates, and then you'd go off and ink up the printer, print it all up. So I was doing all of that, and then you put a good one on the top, wrap it up, put a good one on the top, and then present it to the customer. And the secretary would do all the invoicing, so you didn't have to do that. But it taught me so much about integrating, giving good service, work ethic, and of course I enjoyed it for a while. But ultimately, I realised it's not what I wanted to do. And we had a couple of wide boys came into the printing company one day, and they had a sound studio. And I thought, and I was asking them about the sound studio, and they wanted to go into video. And I was saying, well, I do all this Super 8 filming, as an amateur, but I could help you set up the video studio. I mean, it's very naive, but they thought that there was something about me, and because I was talking about, photographic terms, F numbers and things like that, and, dollies, and dolly is a moving thing, not playing with dollies, all of that. So I negotiated with them privately, and they got me to join their sound studio. So I never got to do the video bit because various things, and I left the company. But I was for 3 months with them, basically working in the sound studio, tape opping and learning about tape. And of course I'd had all my previous experience with my dad's Grundig reel-to-reel. But I did have to leave because they made me go and drive a car, and I'm short-sighted, quite badly short-sighted. They wanted me to go into town and get some glue, I seem to remember, and it was a snowy day in the winter, and they're on this farm in the middle of nowhere, and I said, well, I can't really drive because I'd lost my glasses that day. And they said, oh, you'll be all right, you could see good enough just to drive in. Anyway, stupidly I agreed, and as I came up the lane from the farm, a car came round the corner and I panicked. And I was, 20, slammed the brakes on, and in slow motion I hit the car. And I shouldn't have been driving, but, I didn't want to let them down, and they kept persuading me to go because they were busy and no one could go, and they just thought they would wing it and I would be all right. But of course I hit the car, then there was the insurance problem, and they just let me go, really. It was a sort of bad taste.
Dear.
So
what happened after that?
Well, after that, I started to think I had to sign on for a bit, but I was also attending lots of courses, and I was into mime, and I got a job teaching mime at an all-girls school. So I'm 20, and this was a private girls' school. It was through a contact, and I was teaching lambda mime skills to these girls 13 and 14, which was quite hilarious, really. But anyway, I was doing that for a bit, and then I started to set up a theatre company and started to get tours and do various theatre things. Then eventually I went to mime school itself, met up with other people, was learning juggling, unicycling, fire eating, because you suddenly get in with a crowd of like-minded people. And then after that got onto the entertainment circuit, doing mime, juggling, unicycling, corporate events, gala shows and all of that. And by which point I'd got married and was starting to have kids. And I'd sort of left the filming for some time, but I was desperate still to try and get into television or something. So during that time I was making pilots of my own pilots of ideas, and submitting them. And I was getting good feedback from commissioning editors, but for some reason I wasn't getting in, or I wasn't being helped, and they said, some of the pilots I were making, they said, these are the best pilots we've had. No one's gone to the nth degree that you have. Because I'd spent like months making this pilot really good. But, and I couldn't understand. It was very frustrating, because I thought, well, if you believe I've got something, can you not recommend me to a production company? I'm not asking you to have to do my shows, but I just want to get into the industry. But for some reason, doors were shut. I think now, looking back, that was meant to happen, because if I was in the broadcast industries, particularly mainstream media, I would have been brainwashed, and I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. So in a way, I'm glad it didn't happen. But in the mid-1990s, I did put together a pilot for a children's television programme called Snug and Cosy, and we did get that on, and we had 2 series of that. It was Laurel and Hardy in spacesuits, I call it, because they were dressed in... it was a slapstick thing, and it was supposed to go around the world. Anyway, there's a whole story connected with that. But I realised how backstabbing, egotistical and money-orientated that the TV industry was. It completely disillusioned me. They weren't interested in trying to make the best programme possible. And I just decided in the end I was going to do my own thing, and at which point YouTube was becoming more serious. In the past it had been very short little clips, and they were, took forever to load up because the internet was slow. But by this point it became possible to make a 30-minute programme and put it on the internet and get 5 people to watch it.
Yeah, which is fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Getting those 5 people.
Those 5 people.
It's brilliant. Certainly better than one, or who happens to be your wife anyway.
Yes, that's right. Please watch this. I need the numbers. You've just increased my audience.
Yeah.
But then, and I was spending 3 months making these programs, and I took the television approach because I understood how television worked, and I would read loads of books about the subject, and I called it the Bald Explorer, and I would read about because they were documentaries that I was presenting, so I would read up on the subject, write a script, then I would go to find the locations, I would go to the locations, and I was doing all this thing about, right, where's the aeroplanes? Is there a flight path? Because that will affect your audio. Where's the nearest toilets? Because if we're spending a day, need to know, so I was doing all the location work that people would do. Where's the parking? Where can you eat? Where do you need permission to film? All of that whole process that went into television, because I was so absorbed on and understanding the TV process, and because I'd seen that firsthand doing the children's television programme, because I'd been there all along the route of that. What props do I need? Do I need any props? Where, what bits will be voiceover? What bits can I do to camera? Is it a busy car? If there are cars here and the sound will be marred by lorries and things, okay, maybe the bit I want to get over there should be a voiceover, because I can do that in the studio. But I took a policy that I would film as much bits to camera as I could, and those bits that failed I would then do as a voiceover. So I would spend ages setting all this up, and then in the end when I went filming, I either got my son or a friend to help me film. I filmed everything but the bits you saw me in doing my bits to camera, and literally I would set the shot up, run just like you did earlier here, where you set the shot up and then eventually put yourself in. You do all of that, and then I would just get my son or whoever was helping me to press the red button, and then I would do it. And of course, whilst I'm doing my bits to camera, I'm aware there's a bloody aeroplane gone over, or the sun's gone in. That was always the thing, so I'd have to go back and say, sorry, we've got to do that. You go, what was wrong with that? I said, the aperture, I'll have to... Because everything was on manual.
Yes.
None of it was on automatic. And there's something I hate seeing is when... I mean, we do it on YouTube, I suppose, but I was trying to make this as a television programme, and you know, the sun goes in and then the gain on the automatic goes up, and it just shows there's nobody behind the camera, or it's being lazy. So I wanted to do everything right, and then I made about 6 programmes like this over 2 years, and I had about 100 people watching them, and I realised I'm not going to make any money out of this. This is nonsense. So then I realised I really had to compromise and bite the bullet. So that's when I got, it's over there, I bought my first GoPro and a little gimbal for it, because in those days there was no stabilisation. And so I thought, what can I do? So I thought I'll just go on walks. And there was only a few people doing walks back then, and a lot of them were doing walks in famous places, you know, like the Grand Canyon or somewhere like that. So I just thought, well, I'm just going to walk around Sussex initially, or England. So I'd take my little gimbal and I would walk and just walk and talk. And I did and developed that and made, and as it worked, and suddenly an audience grew and some money was coming in from the adverts, I slowly progressed and bought more gear and was making more complicated programs. And I was working a lot faster and with sort of DSLR and mirrorless cameras, and I started to get, you know, B-roll and all of this stuff, and got really good with it. I did that for 5.5 years.
Fantastic. So
and built a bit of an audience.
Yeah, brilliant.
And then everything changed.
Yeah. Well, that kind of brings us on nicely. Did you consider yourself to be a rebel pre-2020, or
No, not really. I mean, I was, you know, I'm Mr. Ordinary. I mean, I think of myself as being quite ordinary and everyday, but clearly in the world I'm a bit of a square peg, because a lot of people just don't seem to have a lot of common sense, don't seem to work things out or live on their wits. And I think when you're self-employed, you've got to live on your wits, because you never know when the next job's coming in. And I used to just want to do things all myself. You know, I'd fixing the house and things like that. I never had any. I've always been poor, never had any money, and you can see the state of my house. It's not a plush house, is it, by any means?
Very characterful, though.
Very characterful, but it's, you know, there's everything's second hand, apart from perhaps some of the monitors and the computers and cameras, because, you know, when it was business I had to buy the stuff because you don't want it conking out.
Yeah.
When it was corporate clients, which I was also then doing to try and pay for everything, which I hated doing corporate videos, because it's not your, you know, if you're creative, you don't want someone else telling you how to do it, and you go, no, that's not going to work, and they go, no, but we want it to be like that, and this is the corporate message, and you're going, oh god, it's not going to work, and then, oh, it didn't really work. How it now? Well, I told you it wouldn't work, because you could see it. But anyway, can't remember your question.
Were you a rebel?
Was I a rebel?
2020? Not
really. No. I mean, no. I mean, I would call things out. I was always being quite opinionated. Mm-hmm. Definitely had my own view on things.
Okay. So we come across this, I suppose, terminology, being awake. You know, we're the awake ones, and then you've got the others. It's a bit of a divide and conquer thing, I think. But how long have you been awake? How long have you sort of thought, well, hang on a minute, things don't quite add up in this world?
Well, that's very difficult to quantify, because I think I was aware of things, but I wasn't aware that I was aware of things.
Exactly like me.
Yeah. So you're kind of thinking things are playing out which don't seem right, but you can't put your finger on it, plus the fact you're busy. So all the time things are still working, okay, I'm going along with it. It just seems a bit strange, some things. And so I guess as I woke up, if you like, or was aware more that things aren't quite right, was, people, when 9/11 happened, people were showing us documentaries about what supposedly had happened, really. And I watched those documentaries thinking, because I remember where, everybody remembers where they were if they were born, when the aeroplanes hit the Twin Towers. And I remember seeing the second one hit the Twin Towers, because I was driving when I heard the first one, and you think, bloody hell, that's outrageous. And I got to where I was going, and I said, stick the television on. And then we saw the second aeroplane hit. And of course the shock of it, and you're not really perceiving things as it actually happened. You're just perceiving things. And then of course later you hear that a third building had collapsed before it had actually collapsed, and things like that. And you're going, hey, what? But there was so much to take in, and of course the enormity of the event, and some of those pictures of people hurling themselves out of the buildings, they're heart-wrenching. And then you were hearing the news, they shouldn't be playing this, but they play people's phone messages of people's last message, I love you, we can't get out, and then that either they were crushed or they threw themselves out the window, and then because so I was watching these documentaries, and these documentaries were implying that it wasn't as it was, and that it was all set up, and I thought, these documentaries, they're so convincing, but the hurdle I had was, could it be the people they suggested it was? And I'm being careful with the language, just in case. As we all now on YouTube have to be incredibly careful with how we express things. And that was the thing that I could not fully believe, that the people that these documentaries were suggesting had done it, and not the story that was acceptable. But yet, the documentaries were so convincing. I mean, the aeroplane going into the, or the so-called aeroplane going into the security, the
Pentagon.
The Pentagon. That's right. Yes, and the fact there was no bleeding evidence for anything, and we'd had Lockerbie, hadn't we? And there were strewn bits of aeroplane, and so all of it was very convincing. But somehow I was able to sort of go, yeah, but. And then of course people were talking about JFK, which had been earlier, of course, and then the moon landings, and you started to see all this stuff, and you're going, there's obviously a business in conspiracy, and so although I was happy to think, yeah, it could be, I wasn't really on that side yet.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I used to think with conspiracy theories, if you just sort of kept to one or two, it'd be more believable. But you were sort of coming out with all of these things.
Yeah.
And there's conspiracies behind it, and I didn't buy it at the time. A few years ago, I thought, no, there's just too many conspiracies for it to be credible. But I know now, no different.
And then, of course, you had the David Kelly incident and the sexed up documents and going to war with Tony Blair, and started to realise that the government weren't telling us the truth. And the other thing, we knew the government never told us the truth, because every so often you would get these big boxes being opened up for the last 30 years, and you'd see what decisions that the Ted Heath government had done, or the Callaghan government had done, and people would reveal what had happened 30, 40 years ago, and the decisions and what we'd been told, and you think, well, if that was happening then, clearly it's happening now, because they're not going to tell you a lot of things. And then of course we went through Brexit, and that's when I really noticed that mainstream media was so biased to the end, and that's when I decided to stop listening to, and I used to love Radio 4, I used to love the comedies, but then I was aware that the comedies again had been infiltrated, and it was one message coming out, and I started to become much more aware, so that when we came into the event of 2020, it was bleeding obvious what was going on.
Yes. So
and so I never acquiesced to any of that nonsense. What surprised me more was other people couldn't see it.
No, that was one of the most shocking things. So you finally turned off mainstream media, what, about 2016 or around?
Yeah, I stopped. I mean, I didn't watch a lot of television. As a kid, I watched loads, kids programs, and that the era when the golden age, as a lot of us generation might think, the A-Team, Mission Impossible, all those sort of things, Thunderbirds. When television was sort of innovative and all these things were quite new I loved that. But as we got on, I found television it drained your time. It was hypnotic, and because I had done quite a bit of extra work on TV as well in my earlier career, and I knew how TV was put together, and I knew that you frame things, but it's like here, you're looking at us here, but you can't see what's going on here, there, and everywhere, and you can't see the state of my carpet, which is embarrassing to me when you've got a guest in and you think, well, I should have just hoovered or something. But so if you frame the camera in a way, you get the best, you get the best of a bad thing. Knowing that, I was aware that television, you think you're watching something that's truthful, but you're not getting the whole picture because a lot of the time you can't. And I knew a lot of it was biased. So yes, I started to reduce my television watching. Eventually, I just got shot of the bloody thing.
Yeah. Well, I came off of mainstream media. The last thing I was listening to was Radio 2 while I was doing my work, and I came off of that in 2019. So just in the nick of time, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's just...
Nice coffee, by the way.
Yeah, I haven't had much of mine, actually.
No, sorry.
So, yeah, I'm going to have a little...
I say it's nice coffee, only because I made it.
So, before we start talking about the events of 2020 onwards, what's your take on spirituality, beliefs, God, etc.?
Well, I think I have been in the last 10 months on a much more expansive journey into that. I've never been convinced of a single deity, and if there was a single deity, I think it was more within us rather than outside of us. When I was young, because my parents were quite quirky, and my mother was an alcoholic and quite verbally abusive, and my dad was very business orientated with his business, and the kids kind of, us, my sister and I turned to a lot of self-help books, and some of those were talking about not so much spirituality, but they were talking about how the mind works, and I was quite interested in the mind, about the subconscious mind and how it gets programmed and things. So I did feel that we are more, and funnily enough, it comes sort of full circle, I suppose, that we are more in control of our life and our environment. But and I always used to sort of associate spirituality with the Victorians doing their seances and these old pictures with so-called ectoplasm, which was cotton wool really on coming out of people's mouths and all of that, with the sort of Ouija boards, and I always associated with that and thought it was mostly a hoax. But I always had that sense that potentially ghosts could exist. Why not? It's not proved or disproved. So I've always been open to it. But in the last 10 months or so, I think because so many people I have spoken to, many more spiritual people, I have a better understanding. So I do feel that we are spiritual, or we are sort of spiritual creatures having a human existence. I just wish we could influence the human existence a lot more than we are able to, and maybe our ancestors were able to do that. because there is theories now that we are creating the reality, and whilst that may be true, I'd like to change the reality I'm creating, really, because I would rather the WEF and the likes of Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates and Tony Blair and the rest of that bunch of crooks weren't part of my reality and destroying a lot of humanity.
Exactly, yes, but maybe that's innate within us, and we haven't discovered it yet.
Yeah, so yeah, I think it's an ongoing journey.
Okay, right. So let's just. Sorry, just obviously I'll be cutting this out, this kind of thing. Right, so we get to 2020 and the events. What did you think when the first lockdown was announced? Johnson at this podium. What went through your head?
Well, I mean, they'd been talking about it, hadn't they? They'd been preempting we may have to lock down. I remember that. And actually, when the first lockdown came, Julia and I were staying in an Airbnb, and we had planned a few days to do our old Bald Explorer stuff, and we were working together. And we stayed the first night, and of course, at that point, everyone was wearing these masks. They weren't mandatory, but and people were told they had to have these distances and things. So we checked into this Airbnb, and the lady there, I remember, had said, we've sprayed it all down and all this. And I was thinking, I wasn't buying into it, because I'd seen those Chinese videos in November, December, when they came out, of people sort of crashing down, and I thought it all looks very fake to me. And then prior to that, we'd seen Chris Whitty say this won't affect anybody really unless you're over 80 or you had these comorbidities. So they'd already announced that on the one day. The next day was like they changed the script, and it was no, this is actually a lot more dangerous than we all thought, and we think we're going to do all this, and it started to escalate. But I was very suspicious, didn't really believe any of it, and didn't want to go along with any of it. So we were in our Airbnb, but then he came on the telly, and we didn't see that. We were just told, I think somebody rang and said, oh, we've all been locked down now. And we were in this Airbnb, and I rang, couldn't go to so that it was in like a separate barn to the house. So I rang the woman because she didn't want to have any contact with us because she was scared. And I said, I gather we've just been locked down. She said, oh yes, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave in the morning. You can stay the night, but you'll have to go in the morning. And I remember thinking, oh right, okay, we'll have to go back. And of course my first thought was, I wonder what the roads will be like, and will the police be there to pounce on any cars going about because they'd suddenly made this an illegal thing. Of course, we didn't see a bloody soul, did we? We drove back, and if you of an inclination, and I'm not saying I did or didn't, but you could put your foot down on those roads, and all the rest of it, didn't see a soul. Everybody seemed to have got so panicked that they were in, and that first week, beautiful sunshine.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I was sitting on my doorstep a lot, and my neighbour came out the house and he was going, this is a load of old crap, isn't it? And I was saying, yeah, and he was like on his side of the road, and I was on my side of the road. And I was respecting him because clearly he didn't want to get any closer. But I just said, this is rubbish. And I said, I'm going out, I don't care. I said, because I'm also running a channel and I do daily videos, daily walks. So I just carried on with my GoPro. Okay, I couldn't go out with my DSLRs and tripod and all that and do it as nice as I used to. I just thought, well, I'll just go back and I, walked around the town, and I went up on the downs. I kept within the locality, but of course, when I was posting these videos, I got lots of abuse from people saying, Richard, you're spreading COVID. You're spreading this thing. You're going to kill your granny and all of this rubbish. And I remember going on the country path and seeing somebody coming up the other way, and as soon as that person saw me, he reversed into this hawthorn bush, and I just thought, this is madness. and people were turning their backs on you, instead of going good morning, they're like, panicking in this ridiculous notion.
People jumping out into the street to avoid you.
Yeah, found it very odd, but it was this sense that, are you all obeying? And then I looked at the guidelines and I looked at the legislation, and what it said in the guidelines was not matching the legislation. Nowhere did it say you could only exercise for an hour in the legislation. But it was just this sort of sense of, well, we're giving you some guidelines. Well, guidelines are only as a guide, aren't they? Legislations. So I just thought you could go out for as long as you bloody well like. Do what you know. They hadn't got to that point yet. So yes, I didn't think of myself as a rebel,
right? But
because I felt that this was overreach. I thought, hang on a minute. You are our servants, and I still think this, and I'm more vehement about this, but we pay you to to administrate certain things, like protect the borders and come up with a curriculum for school, although they loused that up. You know, you are our servants, and now you're telling us, because, you know, health and safety, and we're not, and of course nobody was allowed to question it. No. And there was the Great Barrington Declaration.
Declaration.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Brain's been, too much of independence gets your brain withered. There was the Great Barrington Declaration, which made sense to me, that protect those people who are vulnerable, but we need to keep the economy going. And when this was just thrown in the bin, and you start to think, this has never happened, and then, oh my God, everyone else around the world are doing it. It was like fever. Everyone had got this fever and was just going, oh, well, they're doing it in Italy. We're going to do all they're doing over there. And then you would try and talk to somebody about it, and they go, yeah, but I think it's the best policy. Everybody, and you go, my God, you're mad. You start raving mad.
It is unbelievable, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I thought it was nonsense. I might have been taken in by it a little bit just right at the start. The first 3 weeks, well, if it saves lives, maybe, but I was always dubious. But then when
the clapping.
Oh, I've never had any time for that. You started to think. I started to think you are taking a piss. Yeah,
out there, and people were, and I would look out the window. There's a little window above the front door, and I would peer out there, and people were out there doing this. And you thought, who can hear you? Nobody can hear you, and you're banging pots and pans. And I thought, this is a psyop.
North Korean, I thought it was. Yeah,
it's that whole thing of the army sort of, smiling and being happy, and I thought, this is mad.
Yeah.
And then if you mention it to people, they just thought you were a rebel or insane.
Yeah. I'm sure certain people I know still think I'm wrong in the head even now, and they certainly did then. They just thought, like you say, I was insane for believing what I believed. It's just crazy. So moving on to things like the second and third lockdowns, and the mask thing, you must have been incandescent with Ray. I know I was. That's how I was.
I just could not believe that. I certainly couldn't believe that the Labour Party were voting for more instead of being in opposition and challenging what was going on. They wanted more, and I just thought, what? Excuse me, that's not your role. Your role is to challenge what's going on. Yes, you might want more. That's fine. But you've got to challenge the status quo and say, well, let's have a look at the other side of the argument, because people are actually, their businesses are being damaged. My daughter is in the hospitality industry in New Zealand, and that was being decimated. You heard of these pubs shutting down, and of course my background had been in the entertainment industry, so I knew that there were people I knew who were no longer working. And then, of course, you had these furlough schemes, and most of the people I knew didn't qualify for any of this. And I never took a penny from any of the government handouts or went for a loan or anything, fortunately, because I was going out filming, and I just kept saying to them, I'm bringing the outdoors to those people who are stuck indoors. So there was some people who were donating and saying, please keep going, because actually we value you going around the countryside, because we're stuck inside fearful of going out. We don't mind you if you go and get the disease and die, but keep sending us the outside. So they were walking with me vicariously. But not everyone, of course. There was plenty of trolls out there. But yes, incandescent, and realised that the government, well, the whole parliament, the whole system was corrupt and not working for the people. And of course, as the years have gone on, that is so bleeding obvious, and it's been
a huge eye opener.
Yeah. And now I'm more annoyed not with the government, because they've shown their teeth, and they're baying at you, and they're dribbling, and and they're smarmy and smug and laughing. I'm annoyed that the public still can't see it, that they're just taking it as it is.
Me too. It's like I was talking to John Looney the other week, and he kept saying, what can't people see? What is it they just can't see? It's just so obvious to me and to you, obviously. And it's just, I don't know. It's just been one of those things, really. It's been just one of those crazy things. Okay, so the explosion of your channel.
Yes.
It's absolutely incredible that this time last year, early October, I'd never heard of you, and probably the vast majority of viewers had never heard of you.
That's true.
And then you sort of come on with that monologue about Neil Oliver's talk, didn't you?
Yes.
And it exploded from there. So how did that feel?
Well, it was a shock. I used to run something called the Vobes show. So during the lockdown, we used to do this, Julia and I mean, partly the studio and all of this was set up to do something called the Vobes show, which was a live streaming show. And we used to do it like once or twice a week. During lockdown, because people were locked down, and I'm an entertainer generally, I thought we'd do this every night. So we were doing it, and it was an interactive show. And of course, during the lockdown, venting some of my frustration about why people couldn't see what was going on, the audience kept saying, no, don't talk about it, we're not interested in that, just obey what the government says, but entertain us on other ways. So I found that quite challenging, so I had to hold back. But when I did that first monologue about was Neil Oliver right in his, and that was the time of the fuel, when the fuels prices were going up really much, and he was saying, should we pay, what would happen if nobody paid the bill? And so my point was, actually, that's quite interesting, I wonder what would happen, is he right? And within a few days I had over 100,000 views, which never happened. So it was like, blimey. And I made another couple of videos on a similar line, just testing the water really, as if that had just been a fluke, and they were reaching 70 or 80,000 views. And I suddenly realised that the audience wanted to talk about, not the old audience, because they were saying, no, Richard, don't talk about, they were still saying that, but completely new people were coming along and saying, this is fantastic, we want to talk about it. And as it progressed, they kept saying, you are talking about it in a very measured way, because and you're very dapper the way you dress and all these sort of things. Because I think what was happening is people were a bit not quite sure that mainstream media was correct. They would go on places like YouTube or Rumble or Odyssey and hear people talking very conspiratorially but passionately and in quite graphic terms, and I was sort of in the middle, just saying, why would the kind, nice, benevolent government want you to take something which actually had no benefit to you, and in fact potentially could have more damage to you? And because these were mostly questions at that stage, it seemed to resonate. So I was thrilled that people found what I was saying or asking found a home.
Did you find it scary as well, because you've got quite a bit more responsibility now with your channel?
No, I didn't really find it as scary. The more I did, the more important it felt to say these things. I just felt compelled to continually ask these questions. And some people were saying, and you know, I got things wrong. Of course, you know, I'm going to make mistakes.
Oh, yes.
And some people were saying, "Oh, you can't say that, Richard," and they would say exactly what you just said, that you've got responsibility. But I would say, well, but you've got responsibility as the audience. You've got to do your due diligence. You can't just take what I say as read. No one can do that. You've got to think: is he talking sense? Is he not talking sense? It's not for me to, you know, people mustn't believe any of the stuff that they see. But they've got to go, well, it's a question. He's asking questions. And I don't think there's anything wrong with anybody asking questions. Whether the answers are right or not is a different kettle of fish. So I wasn't scared, and in the end, I wasn't really worried about the responsibility, because I might be putting up ideas. The thing was, you'll remember, I mean, Brexit was that beginning of the, if you don't follow the narrative, with your opinion, you're an idiot. We started to see much more that visceral name calling, and of course the woke agenda was coming in, and all of those things had been around for some time. And if you didn't believe in Black Lives Matter, or if you didn't believe in any of these certain things, if you disagreed with it, then you were an idiot, or you shouldn't be around, or you should be exterminated or cancelled and all that. And my point was, we're all entitled to an opinion, and we should be able to listen to somebody. We don't have to agree with it. We can vehemently disagree with it, but we must have the respect that everybody has an opinion. And the other thing is, we change our opinions.
Yes.
You know, that's the whole point of talking to somebody who has an opposing opinion, is you might go, actually, do you know, I hadn't thought of it like that. And I don't agree with all of what you say, but I can accept that. That's given me food for thought. That's what an exchange is about.
Yeah, it's all part of the human existence.
Absolutely.
The experience, yes, indeed. Right, so why do you think your channel grew so quickly? You've covered it in part, but
I don't know why it actually grew. I mean, it seemed to hit a what do you call it, a nerve, and then the algorithm, I suppose, saw it was. I mean, I've been doing YouTube for a long time now, but I still don't really understand how the algorithm works, and I don't think YouTube really understand it either.
It's a dark art, I think.
Exactly, but somehow it was being presented to people, and for I don't know why, for some reason, people were subscribing incredibly generously in large numbers, and it was escalating, and then we hit the 100,000, and you know, we get the plaque on the back of it, which I put on the wall. I'm not really somebody who likes those sort of tokens of, oh, you've reached this, so you get a cup or an award or things like. I mean, I had an award for my podcast, which I didn't even mention in the other bit. But it's like, great, thank you very much. But I don't do it for trying to win accolades and things. I do it because it's important, it seems to me, to be able to talk to people, and also I enjoy it.
Yes, I think part of the reason as well for your huge growth is back in 2020, early 21, there was quite a culling of people who spoke along these lines, who were articulate and presented well. And for a while there was a bit of a vacuum, and they had to put up with relative amateurs like me, electricians who just sort of speak their mind in their vans and things like that. And then, which is great, a lot of people
don't absolutely, because you're I'm an entertainer, so I come in with a certain sort of skill set, and I'm used to being in front of the camera and those sort of things. But you're the real deal. You're not there as a professional presenter. That's what you do day in, day out. You're doing the real work. You're talking to real people in the real world. So you're in many ways more authentic than I am. I'm not saying I'm not authentic, but I'm authentic in terms of, I'm used to sitting and talking to the camera as if it's a person. It's not an inanimate object with this big lens, but that's what I've been doing for a long time. But so don't, absolutely. And without voices like yours, it doesn't, we need that broad spectrum.
We do, yes. Yeah. But I think you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
So, I think we talked about this earlier on, and you said it's not for you, but thoughts on being a leader of the freedom movement?
A couple of people have. You know what it's like. You say something in a video, and then you read the comments, and you get people like saying, "Oh, Richard Vobes for Prime Minister," and you must have had things like that.
Yeah.
Because you're talking the same language that the audience understand, and then suddenly, because you're on the screen and you put yourself out there, that people think that you've got those skills. I'm not a very good team player, for one thing. I like to do things my way. I am a Leo in my star sign, and so people say, well, that would make a good leader. And a few people have said, oh, Richard. But the thing about a leader is once you're leading something, there's nowhere to go. And you can make some horrendous decisions. And also, can you really lead people? Because there's always somebody going, I wanted to be the leader, ready to knock you off. So I don't know. I mean, I'm happy in the role that I'm doing, trying to just put my point of view out. And I'd hate that term influencer.
Yes.
I hate that term because I don't, it's like that's as bad as the BBC. They're influencers. They're programming people. I just hope that people see me as a voice amongst many voices that people can go, they can either agree with or disagree with or agree partly with or some of it with, but there might be, in amongst all the nonsense I talk, there might be the odd seed of common sense or something that helps a group somewhere or an individual, or I can make someone laugh.
Yeah. The way I sort of see, or partly see my role, is just being a spreader of, a super spreader indeed, of ideas and news. If someone watched a video of mine and then they thought, that's a good idea, I'll run with that, and then a couple of years later there was a big sort of movement from that spark, and that would make me so proud. And it's not that I want to lead anyone or be an influencer, but I'd just like to be help those seeds to germinate. Be a bit of fertilizer, basically. Is how I see myself. Right, we're coming on to these hard questions. I forgot to turn that on, but it shouldn't matter too much. Okay, so with the rapid growth of your channel, there's going to be the naysayers, there's going to be people who question what's going on there. It's just human nature, whether it's jealousy or what, I don't know, but I'm going to ask the question because there's going to be viewers watching this saying, Tim, why aren't you asking this question? Richard, are you controlled opposition?
Well, do you know, it's funny you should say that, because I did a talk, one of the early talks that I did, where people have been very kind enough to ask me to turn up and give a talk, and they had to write all these questions, the way they did it, and they just gave me these questions, and I said, well, I won't look at the questions before, I just answer the questions as they come up. And I was going through them, and one question was, are you gay? And it's like, no, I've got this lovely girlfriend. I pointed at you then, you're not the lovely girlfriend, just so you know. I've got the lovely girlfriend who is the lovely Julia. And so that was one. The next question was, are you a shill? Now, let me say, I'd never heard this term shill until I was interviewing, no I wasn't interviewing, somebody had watched it. We were talking about the Constitution. I was talking to William Keats, and he was introducing me to the notion of the British Constitution. And somebody else made a video about me saying I was a shill because I wasn't talking about the English constitution, that I was selling the country short, blah blah blah. And I said to a number of people, I said, "What the hell is a shill?" I kept saying it was a shrill, because I'd never heard the term. And then it was this, controlled opposition. And so there am I with this question, and I said, well, the thing is, how do you answer that question? Because you could easily go, well, no, of course I'm not. And then, how do you know I'm telling the truth? Mm-hmm. So if I was controlled opposition and you just go, no, of course I'm not, don't be ridiculous, what a stupid question. How do you still know? And in a way, if I was controlled opposition, at some point, what would be the role of the controlled opposition? Would be what? To disrupt or put people on the wrong path or whatever. So you would end up showing your colours, wouldn't you? You'd have to, otherwise you're not doing the job of a controlled opposition, if that's what it is. I don't really know what they're supposed to do, maybe distract from the things they should be doing, or telling some truth and not the whole truth, I don't know. So in the end, I end up having to, the only way you can answer that is to say, well, meet me, talk to me, you find out for yourself. So I should throw that to you and say, do you think I'm controlled opposition? And if so, what makes you think so?
Personally, I don't think so. It's gut instinct, and I suppose there's little clues. This is a random one, but the desk you see Richard on when he's doing his presentations, you might think it's some fancy desk, but it's a bit of second-hand kitchen worktop on a couple of builder's trestles, and that is...
It's given it away now, see?
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm giving away the trade secrets here.
See that is typical television. Or filmmaking is what you don't see is usually the cheapest things you can get and the available things. You don't see the bits of gaffer tape that are holding things on that you think is, so that's what it is. It's some builder's trestles, a bit of old stuff, and so much stuff is what you don't see is behind the camera is just cheap and cheerful, but the money goes into the stuff that you see on the camera, or that's how television works. Yeah. But I'm glad you said I wasn't controlled, because obviously I've got away with it really well. Convinced you. Yeah. I've convinced. But people know where I live. They send me things, so it's not like I'm really trying to hide. And I would love to. I mean, if I was controlled opposition, presumably somebody's paying you. Well, I wish they would hurry up and send the checks.
Okay, well, kind of following on from this, it's another hard question.
Okay.
Which people kind of asked me as well, so you're not alone in this. Richard, are you a Freemason? A
Freemason? No, I'm not. Only the other day I watched a video of a Freemason, of the 33rd degree. Yeah. Started to realise what they were. I know people who are Freemasons, but they're the nicest, and so this is what I understand of Freemasonry, and it's a new concept to me, because I thought there were Freemasons and then there were people like the British Lions, and I thought they were all the same. I now know that Freemasons are very different from people like the British Lions, and that there's sort of two tiers where everything's all very good and they're trying to do the best, and then the further the tiers you go up, you get to the more negative, dare I say, Luciferian type things, which I hadn't really given that much to. And of course, in the 10-month journey, so much of this, and I watched this video the other day, and pretty much everybody who is a pop star are doing all these symbols. So there's this thing with the one eye. You may have seen it. Yeah. Now I daren't do it because someone will clip it out.
They will.
That's the thing. And now I have one eye because I lost an eye, and I didn't do that on purpose because I wanted to show a symbol. I had lost my eye because of bloody Canthamoeba keratitis, which ate the cornea. I had 3 cornea transplants. But it's funny, since understanding what Freemasonry is and some of these symbols, when people have asked me, when somebody asked, which quite high up, and said, "Can you tell me about your eye?" That was one of the first questions. And I thought, what's that about? I said, oh, if you'd seen it, it can look like a lazy eye. It's actually a prosthetic, and I can pull it out and, you know, do heads and tails with the thing. But it's interesting. I mean, it's fascinating because I guess people are asking that about all people who make it get to a certain degree. I'm not. I wouldn't know. You know, there's a certain handshake, and it wasn't until I watched this video I saw them doing this handshake, and that makes me like even worse now because I feel, have I accidentally done it? When you know, and then people go, ow, or have I accidentally shown one of those symbols in my thing? Now in the studio, did I mention this to you? I can't remember. I mentioned it to someone about the in your previous bit about the Spitfire.
Oh yes.
So people, so I refer back to a bit that we filmed earlier about this bloody thing, Spitfire hanging up the right way round, as we mentioned, and people were saying, "Oh, that's a sign of something," and you just think, "No, we just hang it up." Oh, it's like, but no. The answer is no. Okay. I wouldn't know how you get into it. And the last thing is, if I met one and they did that handshake, I would be so wary.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you what you think of Freemasons as well, but I think you answered it really.
Well, I think there's, as I say, I think there's some people who are incredibly naive and think they're for the good. But I think that actually, you know, and there's probably Freemasons watching. That's the problem. But I think actually, you know, they are incredibly misguided, and they follow what's Lucifer the light, I think, at the top end. And I think some of them will not be at that point and will think that what I'm talking is, again, conspiratorial until they get to that and they start doing these rituals and things. And half the problem is they're the ones causing the damage.
Indeed.
So, definitely not.
Okay, right, well, last of the hard questions.
Hang on, I've got to do my secret symbol.
No, you don't have to answer this, but
okay.
What's your jab status?
My jab status?
On the lurgy one, you know.
On the lurgy one. Well, I had a tetanus when I was a kid.
Right.
I had what was the one you had in there?
Polio?
I had the polio sugar cube.
Oh, right, yeah.
Years ago, and the TB. TB, and I think that's it.
Right, so nothing of a post 2020 nature.
No.
Right.
My dad was very anti pills, and I I've rarely taken an aspirin or a paracetamol. I hate pills, so I take after my dad like that, and I hate injections even more. So even if I wasn't thinking about this thing, I have this innate feeling that the immune system is far better than anything man can make in a lab. And of course I've been very suspicious. So yeah, I had none of those jabs, thank you very much. So please, don't give me any.
No, I'll try and refrain from that.
So if they're the hard questions, then they weren't hard at all.
Oh, well, I'm glad you think so. So, well, really, there's not a lot left here. Maybe there's a few things, but Richard, what's your most prized possession?
See, that's a hard question. The lovely Julia, of course. Well, she's not a possession, of course. What is my most prized possession? Gosh. I mean, obviously kids and things like that. Well, I guess it's not a real thing, is it? As in, it is a real thing, but it's not something. Freedom.
Yes.
You know, everything else you could just, it's money, you can buy it, you could somehow get it, or you can materialize it. But I said freedom and common sense. Yeah,
and that's why you're fighting as hard as you are, because freedom is your most prized possession.
Absolutely, yeah. And the ability to think for yourself, independence. You know, or that whole bag of goodies. Freedom, independence, critical thinking, your wits, basically your mind, isn't it? It's your own mind. That's the thing that I think is the most important. People might say it's your spirit, of course, I would say that comes into it, but it's no one. But if it was a materialistic thing, I don't know. I mean, it changes with the wind, really. You know, one day it might be the van, another day it might be one of my cameras. It might be the ability to speak. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot we take for granted, but if you lost them,
yes,
you'd be up.
I wouldn't want to lose another eye.
No, I didn't know about your eye. I've seen enough of your videos and seen you here now for a couple of hours, and I haven't even noticed. So that's
very kind.
That shows you how observant I am, and
I do
how
have
good it is. Yeah.
I have a video on YouTube, Richard Vobes. If you put in Richard Vobes fake eye, or what else do you call it? Ocular eye, or prosthetic eye, it'll probably come up. And I can't remember. I think I take it out in that video.
Oh, right, okay.
I actually take it out.
I haven't seen that one, I'm afraid.
No,
so
don't worry. It's a bit grim for some people.
So, future plans. First of all, future plans for the YouTube channel.
Keep it on air is one of the things. I've had 2 strikes. Future plans. I think where I am now, you see, when I started the last 10 months, I realised that it was important to say what the problem was, or identify it for me, and I went down the rabbit holes. Then it became obvious that I didn't want to keep putting people in fear by just reminding people that we're in terrible times, and I wanted to find the solutions. And so I've been doing that for the last few months. But now I think the next thing is helping people do the solutions. It's that thing about people kind of go, yeah, okay, we know what to do, but how do we do it? And so now I think it's and I shall be exploring this, is because I think people, you know, they need hand holding. A lot of them, they're willing, but they feel on their own. It's like a bit of a trauma, and so it's kind of like going, here's the problem, there's a big main road, and ideally we'd like to be on the other side. So the solution is we cross the road, and actually there's a zebra crossing. Oh, I'm frightened of the black and white of the zebra crossing. So they're the solutions. So the next bit is, well, take my hand and I will lead you across the road. So I feel that's where we are now, where I almost need to find step-by-step guides on how we solve the situation. Not saying that's going to be easy, but but I feel that's where we're at.
Yeah, well, you're certainly doing your bit on that. And what's your future plans for your own life? You're kind of telling me that you would like to move more into the countryside and grow your own food and that sort of thing. Is that right?
Yeah, it's been a long ambition, but I think now more than ever to connect back with nature, to move away from towns with 5G in them, to get back to the most important things in life, and that is breathing clean air, drinking clean water, growing healthy crops, and being one with yourself, and the loved ones around you. I still want to carry on doing the YouTube channel, but I'd like to spend less time doing that and more time being me.
Yeah, and well, that's probably quite a good closing thought, but have you got any closing thoughts?
No.
I think just you being you. I was talking to someone else and they said they look forward to the day when they can stop doing all of this kind of thing, stop going on about all the problems and the powers that shouldn't be, as I call them, and just get back to being me. And that's how I feel. That's how you feel, as you've just said.
Yeah.
And it would be so good just to do our little bit to get to the world we want and to leave that kind of legacy.
Definitely, absolutely. And I think, but the thing is, I think we are going there. I think that so much of this is theatre, and there's so many distractions to keep us down. But actually, if we can pull back from most of it, I think we'll be all right anyway. That's not to say we don't do anything. Of course, there's lots to do.
Yeah, indeed there is. I've just made a video today which is on the platform YouTube, and it's we've got to play the long game.
Yeah.
getting to where we want to be is not going to be an overnight thing, and even if all we do in our lifetimes is lay the foundations, we'll have done our bit, and then hopefully future generations can keep the ball rolling and build the future we want, and get rid of the one that the powers that shouldn't be want.
Yeah.
So, Richard, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim.
Cheers. Right. Okay. I think that went pretty well, don't you?
Yeah. Well, I hope so. Are you happy with all my responses?
I am. Yeah.
Was I supposed to say yes to the
well,
to the controlled opposition?
I know if I hadn't have asked those questions,
someone will. No, but it's funny. I mean, the thing is, I've really got nothing to hide. You know, I mean, it's, and I don't mind being challenged because there's nothing there. You know, we've all got skeletons in our cupboard, but not in this element of world. You know, we've all done stupid things. You go, oh, that's embarrassing. Yeah. But I haven't really done anything. That's the thing. I'm a bit of a goody two shoes, really. Yeah, you were horrified when I was talking about driving a car with a hole in the petrol tank. And, well, I know, it's like, blimey, that sounds risky. Yeah, that was sort of one of my little secrets from the past, from my silly young days. Yeah. I was very stupid when I was young in a lot of ways. I think that we should be allowed to be stupid. I mean, this is the other thing with the woke thing, and this is what really annoys me, because I record a podcast every morning, which is just an audio thing called The Naked Englishman, and there's a link on the YouTube channel, and very few people listen to it because I don't promote it, and it's only on my website. It's not on Spotify and all these other places, and it's just it's behind the scenes, and it's my thoughts, and I treat it like a first draft of the day. Mm-hmm. And very often I'll say things and I won't necessarily construct the sentences brilliantly or the thought brilliantly, but it's like your first draft. And people have been in touch and said, "Oh, you know, you're this or you're that because you said something." And I think to myself, "Hold on, I haven't." You know, sometimes I listen back to my own thoughts and think I disagree with myself. It was just that's me getting it out. And we must be allowed to change our mind, U-turn on things as we think about things. Otherwise, you know, if you've got to stand by every comment that you said, which may have come out stupidly or hasn't had the time to be thought about, what kind of society is that? Exactly. Yes. Yeah, we are who we are, and I'm not going to apologise for that and for my mistakes. We all make them. Absolutely. And I've said things in my videos that I wouldn't say again or anymore, but they're there, and I'm taking the videos down or anything. And that's how it is. Yeah, life is a progression, and we're developing and changing and all the time.